Don't be too surprised. Will Robinson here from Robinson's Auto Tools@time.com. Welcome back, guys. Sorry for the delay in videos. I have a lot of things changing in my life in the last couple months. Maybe I'll touch base on that in some other video. However, today I'd like to try to pick up where we left off. Hopefully you guys do the same for me. And try to get these repair videos flowing back at you. I got this 2001 PT Cruiser that has a misfire at idle. Seems to clear up once you start driving. However, it is a pretty severe misfire. And it's not acting like ignition to me. It's more like maybe a burnt valve, bent valve, or maybe jump time at one time. Really don't know until we dig in a little deeper. It has been to a garage where the owner opted not to repair it. Ended up picking the car up cheap. So hopefully it's an easy fix. So we're going to get in there, troubleshoot it, and see what's all involved. So let's do it to it. Now let me demonstrate the symptoms before we get started. As you can tell from the shaking of the engine and the sound of the exhaust, there's an evident misfire at idle. Does clear up. To me it sounds like an imbalance, like maybe a burnt valve or something going on. One of the cylinders, so let me shut this thing down before it gets too hot. I'll go over a few things that I do know. It has new spark plugs put in it, new wires, and I believe the coil pack's been replaced at least once. So kind of takes out most of the ignition for us as being the problem. However, there is more that could be involved. However, I did do a power balance check on it. It's very hard to get to this coil to demonstrate it. What I did, I loosened up the plug wires going to the coil, and I had them just so they were slightly on there, and then I have an insulated pair of needle nose pliers, started the vehicle up, and I removed one wire at a time to see if I could find what cylinder was having that misfire. Cylinder 1, you can see a difference. See an obvious difference. Cylinder 3. I do see a difference. Maybe not so much. There's cylinder 4. See, much bigger difference than 3. So as you've seen with that quick power balance test, all 4 cylinders are firing. Some are more impacted than others. Like when you see when I unhooked number 4, it almost killed the engine. That's because that one's firing really good. Number 1, you can tell was firing, there was a difference. Number 2, same thing. Number 3, you notice a less of a difference in the change of the engine when I unhooked it. So I'll be leaning towards number 3 as a cause, most likely. However, we got to pull the intake off, the upper intake plenum, pull the plugs out, see if we notice anything there. In addition, maybe we'll do a compression check, but we'll take it from there. Let's pull it apart. I'm going to start with the simple things. I'm going to open this up a little bit, disconnect the air temp sensor, intake duct clamp, pop the retaining clips for the air cleaner housing. There's a little tube underneath, pop that out. Next we'll take and remove the throttle cable, the cruise control cable, just turn it up, pull it out. It's a little retaining clip, as you see with that little nub, slides in, goes through a little hole in the bracket. And just pop this little retainer here like so. These cables pushed off to the side. One up there for now, and put this one out here. Okay, we'll take unplug this sensor. Little retaining clip right here. Pop that out. These steps that I'm demonstrating to pull this upper intake plenum is the same steps you got to take to pretty much do a tune-up on this, because you got to remove this upper plenum in order to get the plugs out. Or if you're changing the coil pack, same difference. Come back here, you'll see a couple vacuum hoses. Take and unhook them. If you look way in the back, right about here, you have two retaining bolts on the EGR tube. We're going to take and remove them. Okay, I got both retainers removed from the EGR tube. Then if we come over here to the left driver's side of the vehicle, you have another vacuum hose right here. You got your idle air connection you got unplugged. Your TPS you got unplugged. And right here you got a retaining bolt that goes to this bracket to the throttle body. You got to remove that as well. 13mm. TPS unhooked. Idle air is unhooked. Okay, that should be everything pretty much unhooked from the upper intake plenum and throttle body. Now if you come down here, you'll see all the retaining bolts that connected to the lower intake. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 8mm. Let's remove them. Make sure you got no debris that's going to fall into this intake. Yep, this one hose right here for the positive crankcase ventilation. As you can see, now you can access all your spark plugs, wires, and your coil pack. It's evident that somebody's been here. However, we're going to take and remove all the spark plugs, perform a compression test, because I'm pretty sure all the basics have been covered on this, so it's something more deeper. If you want, you can take and mark all them wires. They're pretty much the same length for 1 and 4 and 2 and 3. I put them back in any order. However, if you want to keep them the same, take and mark them. Looks good. Don't look too bad. Don't look too bad. Don't look too bad. Like I said, these are all pretty much new. For a quick compression test, I'm just going to take and unplug the coil pack. It's got a little red retainer there to keep you from unplugging it. Just push that back, and then you can push down on the clip. Okay, so that prevents it from getting spark. In addition, I removed the fuel pump relay. Now we'll perform a compression test to start number 1. I'm going to do this without hooking the battery charger up, so we're not going to be super critical with it. 5 seconds each crank. Got about 145 PSI. And number 3. Now 145. We got about 70. So 145, and 70. At 155. Next, there's a few different checks you could do. We could do a cylinder leak down check. There's a few different ways that you go about it. The easiest way I find is to remove the valve cover, make sure all your valves are closed before doing a leak down test. And there's a couple other things. We can do a smoke test to the cylinder, see if we got smoke coming out of the intake valve or the exhaust or whatnot. So let's take and remove the valve cover. In order to remove this valve cover, you got to remove the coil pack and your power steering reservoir. If you go down in the back, there's two 13mm bolts, retaining bolts that hold the bracket. I got them removed, as you can see. Now I can take and remove the coil pack. You got four 10mm bolts that hold that down. Once that's removed, then you got your 8mm retaining bolts all the way around the perimeter, and then you can pop your valve cover off. So let's do it. Another good thing I like to do, guys, since we're starting to remove retaining bolts, take and shove some rags in this open intake so you don't drop anything down in there. I'd rather spend a few pennies on rags and drop something down that intake and spend a couple hundred later, even though I got to pull the head off, most likely. I'm going to just find a small place to give it a little pop. Oh, I have to fix that later. Plastic brittle vacuum hose, just put it on. Okay, what I want to do here now, we know that number 3 is our worst one. I want to make sure I get it to a point where all the valves are closed. Now I'm going to install my compression tester without the Schrader valve in it. So just a hose from the pressure tester without the Schrader inside, so that'll allow air to go down or whatever. I could use low compressed air, but I'm going to show you with the smoke machine. I'm just going to tap the engine over until I achieve my desired point. Alright, looks like about the best I'm going to get it. Okay, so if you come in here, you'll see what I was trying to do. If you look at the lobes on the cams, these two lobes are facing right here, upwards, which means they're not pushing down on the two exhaust valves. These two lobes for the intake are facing up, so they're not pushing down on the intake valves. So that cylinder, as far as the valves go, should be airtight. So what I'm going to do next is take my compression tube, remove the Schrader valve from it, and then I'm going to hook my smoke machine up to this. Okay, in order for this test to work with the compression tester, you got to take and remove the Schrader valve. Just like what you find in a tire, it allows air to come in but not out. So when you're doing a compression check, it pushes the air up through the tube to the gauge, but it gives you time to monitor the gauge because it won't just be a static, it'll be more of a steady pressure. This will hold the pressure inside the tube. So you take and remove the Schrader valve, now the air will pass both ways. This one takes the adapter. I'll get a number 3 cylinder. Now with this check, I'm going to take and remove all the intake rags. And it looks like the exhaust valves are open on a number 1 cylinder. So we might see some smoke coming out number 1. So don't be too alarmed with that. What that is just the back pressure from the exhaust. We should see some smoke coming out the exhaust as well. But you might see some coming out number 1 because we had spark plug removed. So it'll be going through the exhaust manifold out number 1. So we can look for that. If we see smoke coming out number 1 cylinder right away, that indicates a burnt exhaust valve or a bent exhaust valve, which is allowing exhaust compression to be lost through the exhaust and out the tailpipe. Or if we see more smoke than this coming out the intake, that means there's a bent intake valve or whatnot, or burnt, allowing the compression to be lost through the intake. Or if we see it coming through the crankcase, that means it's rings or a piston. So let's do it to it. I got my smoke machine hooked up, so we're going to see what happens. You see the smoke coming out. All right. You see I'm starting to get some smoke out. Also starting to get a little more smoke out the intake. Not really seeing anything here, I think, because it's coming right through the... Definitely got some coming out the number 1 cylinder. That's indicating that we do have a leaky exhaust valve. Might just be slight, might be major, but there's definitely a leaky exhaust valve. Alright, now for this next test, I'm going to do somewhat of a leak down test, even though I'm not going to be using a traditional leak down tester, because my other one needs a gauge, to be honest with you, so I'm waiting for a snap-on truck to come by. However, if you remember this one from a few videos ago, on a Volvo head job, I used this for checking the radiator and the coolant system and found a bad cylinder head. But what I'm going to do with this, since I can regulate how much air pressure I'm putting into it, my shop compressor is 120 pounds. I really don't want to put 120 pounds to it, even though it wouldn't hurt. But sometimes if you put 120 to it right away, it'll turn the motor over. And then we're going to have to bring this back up so the valves are closed. So if I put air pressure, same thing. You got to remove the Schrader valve because you're going to be putting air the opposite way than this hose was intended for. But I'll be putting air into that cylinder, and then just like the smoke machine, if there's a leak, we should hear the air leaking out of that spot. So if we hear it coming through the crankcase, then we know it's the pistons or the rings, or maybe a crack in the cylinder head, or it could be a bunch of things. If it's coming through number 1, it means it's going through the exhaust and through the exhaust valves. Or if we hear it going out the exhaust pipe, if we had the spark plugs in the rest of the cylinders, we'll hear it going out the exhaust pipe. That means it's the exhaust valve. If it's an intake valve, we'll hear it coming out the intake. Without further ado, I don't know if you can see that, but right now it's at 20 pounds. That's 0. I can crank it all the way up. Just going to hook it up at 0. So you can see it. We're going to take and we're going to open it. So this is going to allow the air to go through into the cylinder. Now let's start putting air to it. And as you can hear there, I only got 20 pounds on the regulator, but there's a little more. And as you can see where all the air is coming out, the number 1 cylinder, which is telling me there's definitely something going on with an exhaust valve. I have nothing coming out the intake, as you can see, but I have all this air coming out number 1. Now if I put the number 1 spark plug back in, since all the other cylinders are closed, we would block this hole in the exhaust, and you hear the air coming out the tailpipe. Hopefully you can hear that. Alright, quick review. What did we confirm so far in our troubleshooting? We checked for our misfire with a power balance. Noticed when we disconnected number 3 spark plug wire, there was very little difference in the way it was idling. The rest of them showed a more drastic change in the engine idle. We did a compression test, confirmed that number 3 cylinder was low on compression, causing our misfire. We put the smoke machine into cylinder number 3, found we had smoke coming out of cylinder number 1, which was due to the exhaust valves being open, which would be my best guess. Put air into cylinder number 3, we had air coming out of cylinder number 1, which was another confirmation that it could be a burnt exhaust valve or a bent exhaust valve. To take it the next step further, in case there was any confusion how the air was taking the path of least resistance through the open exhaust valves in cylinder number 1 and coming out the spark plug hole, I took and I reinstalled cylinder number 1 spark plug, which made all the air go out the tailpipe. Went back there, we listened for it, just in case it was hard for you to hear it. I installed a glove, and as you've seen, when I put air to it, it blew the glove up. One more thing I was noticing, this engine was cooled down, so there shouldn't be any pressure in this upper radiator hose. Well, after I got done with all my tests, I started unhooking everything. I was like, wow, I hear some gurgling noises, and my upper radiator hose has pressure in it. Just to confirm there's no pressure in it right now, I'll remove my pressure tester. Install my pressure tester. I'm not going to use this to pump any pressure. I'm simply going to use this for the gauge. Now when I'm putting air into the cylinder, that's totally sealed from the coolant system. The coolant system runs through the cylinder head and parts of the engine block, but it's separate. The compression in the cylinder is separate from the coolant system. So when I apply air to the cylinder, there's no way it should be going into the coolant system unless there's a blown head gasket, which is possible, a cracked head, cracked cylinder wall, which we hope it's not. But when I put air into this cylinder, I should not see this gauge move whatsoever. So what I'm going to do now is apply air back into cylinder number 3 and see if this pressure in that upper hose was due to me applying air here. If it was, then we definitely have something much deeper. Cylinder head would have to come off to verify what the problem is. So let's do it to it. As you can see already, it's pushing my pump handle up on my pressure tester. I'm only at 30 psi with 20. As you can see, my needle is starting to climb and the pressure is starting to build in the coolant system. We have much deeper problems here, guys. It's either blown head gasket, cracked cylinder head, or a cracked cylinder wall. I don't need to see any more. The head's got to come off.